Poor, doubting Thomas, destined to be the negative example. The what not to do for future Christians ever since the Gospel of John was written. The writer of the Gospel of John used Thomas, this character, symbolically for a spiritual instruction to us about the new type of relationship with Jesus that is necessary after Easter, one which comes through the testimony of the church, since it's no longer possible to see Jesus in the flesh. The gospel writer may have written Thomas to symbolize this particular lesson about accepting the witness of other believers. But I see something else in this story too. I see Thomas as a person who doesn't quite think like the rest of the disciples. He sees things differently, and he needs different things to be able to connect with Jesus and with the other disciples who will become the church. And that is true of many of us. Our experience of the world, the way our brains absorb and process information, is vastly different. These brain differences are one of the many forms of beautiful human diversity that reflect God's image. One of the best things about being a school chaplain for so many years before I came here to Holy Family is that I learned to see children with the eyes of an educator. And for me, that meant unlearning common assumptions in order to understand that kids who struggle with behavior or academics are not choosing to be disruptive or unkind. They aren't lazy, and they aren't the product of bad parenting, which, sometimes people think. Kids struggle when their brains are wired in a way that doesn't fit with their environment. And when I began to see this, it unlocked my compassion. I realized how anxiety-provoking it is if the letters and words don't line up consistently, or if the social rules are like a secret code that you haven't figured out, or if your brain goes so fast that everything being taught is boring after 5 minutes and your body really, really needs to move. April is Neurodiversity Awareness Month. Neurodiversity is a big umbrella that includes autism spectrum folks, people with ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and other brain differences. Scientists estimate that 15 to 20% of humans fall under this umbrella. That is huge. In America, the number of people who identify themselves as being neurodiverse is 19%, 1 in 5. If we want to be a welcoming and inclusive church, which I know we do, we certainly want to be sure we are including 20% of humans. It's also important to be aware that there are a huge range of abilities related to neurodiversity, and a similarly huge range of feelings about it. This Awareness Month is not a celebration for everyone. Some people want their severe disability cured, and others, especially those who need less or no support, might see their brain differences as their superpower, and the idea of a cure as offensive. In the case of autism, which has been in the news so much lately, over the last 20-ish years, the diagnosis has changed from being applied to people who are severely impacted and often nonverbal to a much bigger range of people who share common traits. Although there are common traits, I like the phrase, if you've met one person with autism, then you've met one person with autism. That's because everyone is so different, even under that umbrella. One of the reasons the diagnosis changed was that people who were able to function well in society started identifying themselves as autistic. They recognized that they had the same traits as those severely impacted people. Initially, doctors resisted this, believing autism meant people couldn't have self-awareness or verbal ability to discuss their experiences. But of course, those doctors were wrong. And the scientific understanding keeps evolving. Because of the way people's own voices moved the science forward after they were initially discounted, I feel it's important in this sermon to quote or use the same language as neurodiverse people in their own words. So much of what you're going to hear from here below is that kind of language. Neurodiversity can bring many gifts. In the words of Daniel Mikulski, who writes a blog about being an autistic Christian, he says people with autism have natural strengths and abilities because of our different brain wiring. We tend to have excellent long-term memories and fine-tuned pattern recognition capabilities. We have the ability to hyper-focus upon and quickly absorb large amounts of information on particular subjects of interest. We tend to be honest and straightforward with people, not seeking to sugarcoat or deceive. While we have trouble making our empathy known, autistic people usually have very deep empathy. I'm honored to be the mom of a person who fits this description to a T. And when I learned Holy Family is a church with a long and valued history of including neurodiverse folks, I felt spirit-led to come here, knowing that my family would be welcome. Yet, in reality, it's not easy for churches to be inclusive of neurodiverse folks. Like schools, churches are built around expectations and physical spaces that aren't always accessible or accommodating. This week, I listened to an episode of the podcast Christianity on the Spectrum about how sensory and social aspects of church can be alienating. And I want to share some of the perspectives I heard so that we can continue to grow in our gift and desire of being a welcoming church. Church can be an overwhelming sensory experience. Church music, passing the peace, and crowded spaces can be overstimulating. This is because people with autism have a sensory processing system that differs from neurotypical people and from each other. Sights, sounds, and smells can be either soothing or jarring. Because autistic people have a heightened nervous system and feel sensations much more strongly than others, these sensitivities are stronger than the preferences of neurotypical people. So it's not just like a like or a dislike, it's a very strong reaction that's physiological. In general, I learned Episcopal churches and other high liturgical churches that have a lot of structure in the service are less overstimulating and tend to be more neurodiversity friendly. But one example that I thought of here at Holy Family is one person who finds the vibrations of our singing bell very jarring and has to plug his ears if he's near the bell because otherwise it can be overwhelming. Related to sensory processing is stimming, or self-stimulating the nervous system. It's a method of self-regulation, often necessary for concentration. It can look like fidgeting, or disassembling and reassembling things, or repetitive movements. Autistic adults often learn to suppress their stims by finding a socially acceptable option, like looking at their phone. Hey, everybody's doing that anyway. Or they sit on their hands. But autistic kids don't have stim suppression. A very common stim is flapping hands. You've probably seen people do that before. Suppressing stims and hiding other autistic traits is called masking. Some people do it very successfully, but it costs a lot of mental energy to mask. So people might leave church or other public settings very tired. The researcher behind Christianity on the Spectrum shared that he needs to be able to pace at the back of the church without anyone looking at him like he's a weirdo. Those are his words. Currently, he said in the podcast that he can do that very unobtrusively because he has a baby So everyone expects him to be walking around in the back of the church bouncing his baby. But he said, eventually my baby will grow up and I'll either need to get another one. I've talked to his wife about that. Or have people accept that his pacing is a part of how he participates reverently in worship. In addition to the sensory challenges church can pose, participating in the life of the church can bring social challenges for neurodiverse people as well. We crave to be social, writes Daniel Mikulski, but it really is like being an alien on the wrong planet. Social language makes no sense, so it's awkward. People think we are weird or aren't interested in social things, but we are. Another person said life on the autism spectrum is like being Alan Turing trying to break the Nazi codes. But instead, you're trying to decipher the neurotypical social codes. It's pretty high stakes. This commonly results in something the podcaster called the Bible study problem. He said, sometimes autistic people join a Bible study at their church, and they enthusiastically engage intellectually, discussing and debating things about context and interpretation of the Bible. And they won't realize that the neurotypical people in this Bible study aren't there to intellectually engage, at least not that way. They want to interact with the Bible as a way of bonding socially and emotionally as a community. They're not looking for disagreement or debate that the autistic people find natural and exciting. And so the neurotypical people experience this factual or intellectual approach as conflict. And after a few months, the autistic person is commonly asked to stop participating in the Bible study. And they're blindsided usually, and it really hurts. I thought this was such a sad story. And this guy had interviewed just hundreds and hundreds of people, and apparently he heard it over and over again. Autistic people can transgress unspoken rules and invisible boundaries that they don't know are there. Neurotypical people can find this upsetting or frustrating if we don't realize that our social expectations are an alien language. Some people on the spectrum are so good at blending in that it's confusing or surprising when they don't speak that part of human social communication that many of us take for granted, which can leave neurotypical people bewildered and unsure what to do. So how do we handle awkward, tense, or upsetting moments when people aren't communicating clearly with each other and don't fully understand why? This is when we can turn to our baptismal covenant for guidance, and we can strive to respect the dignity of all human beings. We may see the world differently, but we all have good brains. And the brains, all of us, were created in God's image. In my experience, neurodiverse people really appreciate having social expectations clearly explained to them without judgment or frustration. Sort of like we might explain an idiom to an intelligent English language learner, calmly and patiently recognizing there's a language gap. Being inclusive of neurodiversity is not always easy or self-evident. It requires sensitivity and self-awareness about our own reactions to people and our implicit biases. Yet it's something that churches, schools, and workplaces are all striving for because we recognize the dignity of all human beings, and also because we recognize the enormous gifts and blessings that neurodiverse people are to our communities and our world. When I think about doubting Thomas, alone among the disciples, insisting that he see the proof of the resurrection, what stands out to me is that Jesus accommodated him. letting Thomas touch his wounds. And Thomas gave us a gift. If he had not asked that, we would not know that Jesus meets and responds to all our very real needs, willing to meet us wherever we are and whoever we are, even if we cannot touch him the way that Thomas did. I am so thankful for Holy Family and all the ways that this community welcomes and includes people with sensory sensitivity and sometimes disruptive stims, people who don't always know how to decipher the social code. I'm thankful that Holy Family is the kind of place where we can hold complicated feelings about being different together, that it can be painful and alienating and also a superpower to be the way that God made us. And I am thankful for the neurodiverse people at Holy Family, for your faith in Jesus and your trust in this church, that it is a safe place for you. Even if we sometimes fall short in fully understanding your experience of the world and what you need, we deeply value you and the wonderful ways that you reflect the image of God.